Good morning. It's April 5th, 2022. Welcome to Triggered. I'm Cory Morgan. This is the Western Standards live daily show we run every day, Monday to Friday, 11:30 a.m. Mountain Standard Time till about 1 p.m. We get a really exceptional guest. Sometimes we'll run later, or sometimes I run out of stuff to babble about, but that's pretty rare and we might stop a little earlier. This being a live show, the comments are always welcome. I like seeing them. Uh, Talk with each other, talk with me, send guests toward or comments towards the guests or questions. I don't necessarily get to them all, but I really try to when I can. I certainly read them all later. As per yesterday when we had some stuff going on, though, just remember, let's keep it somewhat civil. We don't always have to agree. By all means, no, we're here to discuss things and debate things. But if you're going to spam the comment scroll, or just start rapid firing things or insulting guests and things, yeah, we'll block you. I mean, you have the right to free speech. You can go speak wherever you like, but you don't have to do it on our platform. Still, I know that 99.9% of our viewers are fantastic, and there's none of that going on. So good to see you all there. Gary, Claudette, Debbie, Scott, all of you saying good morning. I love seeing the viewer line filling up as we get ready for a show, and I got a good one. First, I'm going to have in studio Andrew Ruland of Integrated Wealth Management. And we're going to have some financial discussion. It's kind of important these days. It might sound a little dry sometimes, but hey, we're all looking at saving our money, working towards retirement, doing those sorts of things, and we need advice in that. We've got a really chaotic, tumultuous world market going on right now, and he's going to talk a bit about that, and we'll just chat about economics and finances in general, and perhaps, where a safe place might be for some of your money. And then I'm going to have a political scientist, Barry Cooper. People probably know that name well, conservative-minded folks out in Alberta anyways. He's been always very outspoken. He's one of what used to be called the Calgary School of Economics. There was a time in the 90s when we had a number of good conservative political scientists, and they were all based out of Calgary. There was Ted Morton, and I think Rainier Knopf, and a few others. And Barry Cooper was one of them as well. And we're going to talk about that seat distribution going on in Quebec. So, that mess that we got going there, and just some constitutional political stuff in general. Politics. But that's what we do around here, right? If you don't like politics, this might be the wrong show for you. I hope not, though. I want to make it the right show so we can have some good discussions and have a good time. Good to see you all there. So, I might as well get into what's got me going today. It's sort of celebratory. I'm seeing what I feel is a good development in healthcare. The NDP, on the other hand, are predictably apoplectic with the firing of Alberta Health Services CEO Dr. Verna Yiu. Yiu was, after all, one of the last senior NDP appointees remaining in the civil service. So it's predictable as well that the NDP is claiming that the termination of Yiu heralds the beginning of a push to make dramatic changes within the Alberta healthcare system. I can only say I hope so. Let's begin with Dr. Yiu herself. I mean, in light of having gone through the biggest healthcare challenge the system has seen in generations, how has Dr. Yiu's performance measured up? I think it's safe to say we haven't gotten our $677,000 per year worth of value out of Dr. Yiu, to say the least. I mean, any manager can be forgiven for being caught flat-footed by the pandemic at the start of 2020. It was an unprecedented event. We didn't know what we were in for, and the world was in a panic. What was Dr. Yiu's excuse, though, for the performance of the Alberta health system at the start of 2022? I mean, we had 2 years of pandemic experience under our belts by then. Why is it that a healthcare system in a province of 4.4 million people was apparently brought to the edge of collapse by a mere 100 and some people in intensive care? We can't pretend the province's healthcare vulnerability was due to a lack of funding. Alberta was already spending as much or more per capita on healthcare than most of the jurisdictions on earth. Billions more in funding was injected into the system in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. With tens of thousands of procedures also being deferred, the health system was flush with more cash than it's ever had before. So if it's a lack of funding isn't causing the weakness in the healthcare system, the culprit has to be either bad management or the system itself. Well, actually, it's both. Alberta's healthcare system is suffering under bad management, ideologically beholden to a broken system. Starting with the management, though. Dr. Yiu, as I said, had 2 years and billions of extra dollars to work with in preparing the healthcare system to withstand pandemic waves. As far as we can see, she did absolutely nothing with those dollars. The ways the system's responding to the pandemic today is just the way it did 2 years ago. At a price of nearly $700,000 per year, I would expect a manager capable of addressing changes and challenges to the system under her care. The problem is, Dr. Yiu is an adherent to the Canadian healthcare religion. The prime tenet of that faith is that nothing aside from funding increases shall ever be applied to the system. The system is the model of perfection, and it's blasphemy to even consider changing its sublime infallibility. The NDP are the high priests of this religion, by the way, thus they ensured they were appointing a stringent disciple of it when they chose Dr. Yiu to be at the head of the sacred system. As far as the NDP is concerned, they chose well, as Yiu did indeed change nothing. Alberta isn't alone. 6 out of 10 provinces in Canada haven't managed to increase their ICU capacity in the last 2 years, despite all of them increasing health spending. And that brings us to the system. Now, despite Canadian mythology claiming otherwise, Canada has one of the most rigid and inefficient healthcare systems on earth. While spending continues to increase, waiting lists continue to get longer, and positive outcomes are waning. We're not getting a good bang for our buck when we're measured against most of the developed nations in the world. It's hard to fault Canadians for clinging to Canada's system, despite its ever more evident shortcomings. I mean, we've been programmed to believe it's the best on earth for decades. The CBC created a series in 2004. It was tasked with identifying the greatest Canadian of all time. With weeks of episodes and carefully crafted discussions, it was concluded that NDP founder Tommy Douglas was indeed Canada's greatest Canadian of all time because he created our current healthcare system. Douglas was formally canonized by the state broadcaster and is considered blasphemy to question his holy creation. We have to break through the spiritual fervor of those defending Canada's broken system, though, and pursue some real reforms. There's hundreds of healthcare systems around the world, and many of them are outperforming Canada's. In fact, most of them are. We need to examine the best of these systems and emulate them. One common denominator in every system superior to Canada is they all have more private involvement in the provision of healthcare and allow for more patient choice. Now, private provision of healthcare is not sacrilegious. We need to focus on outcomes for patients rather than a misguided fixation on a fully socialized system. I couldn't care less about the American system, by the way. People like to point south of the border at the USA and use their system as some sort of bogeyman. Healthcare zealots will righteously howl that we'll surely become just like the Americans if we dare change any aspect of the Canadian system. That's a load of bunk. When somebody makes that claim, all it proves is they've fervently closed their mind to rational and productive discussion on healthcare reform. As with Canada, the American system is just one among hundreds. Universality is the principle most people agree upon maintaining. Nobody wants to see a person turned away from care due to lack of funds or wants to imagine a person being bankrupted from paying for essential care. Universality is maintained in most of the systems superior to Canada's, while allowing for competition and private involvement in the healthcare provision. Private provision options and universal care are not mutually exclusive things. And that myth is another one of the ones that needs busting. Healthcare always sits at the top of the polls among issues concerning Canadians, but we've been programmed to avoid any critical discussion on how to improve it. The firing of Dr. Verna Yiu isn't a sign of an attack on universal healthcare, though there's some doctors and NDP folks claiming that right now. It's an indication of a government, though, beginning to embrace the need and agenda of reforming a broken system. I mean, turfing Yiu in itself won't solve Alberta's healthcare woes. It is a good start, though, and it signals that nobody's role or position is sacred, and the government has finally started at the top. Let's hope they continue with it. Okay, well, that's my rant on the healthcare for today. I really do hope it does turn into some positive change and they follow up on this, because if it is just politicized, it was just because she was NDP appointed. Well, that's not the right reasoning, but I think we've laid out good enough reasons why Dr. Yiu clearly hasn't been an effective head of the Alberta Health Services to this point, and we can certainly do better with the replacement. So let's check in with Eva Sudik from the newsroom and see what else we've got topping the news today. Hey, Eva, how's it going?
Good. How are you, Cory?
Very good, thanks.
Today in the news, we got Conservative candidate Leslyn Lewis spoke at an event in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan, where she addressed a wide range of topics like globalism, abortion, conversion therapy, defunding the CBC, even Klaus Schwab's The Great Reset and digital IDs in Canada came up. Check out that article to read her stances. The president of the National Police Federation, Brian Sauve, says that policing is being unfairly treated and not treated with respect. Now, 30% of RCMP trainees are dropping out while applications are declining. In Canadian national security, they're getting an increase in funding, says Defense Minister. 1.36% of GDP will be spent on military this fiscal year. And that is expected to have a 70% increase in spending on the military over the next 9 years. So a lot of billions are going to the Canadian military. And that follows the Liberal government saying that they will decrease spending. But we are yet to see that happen. We have another article up on how the House of Commons Finance Committee has made 222 recommendations to lower the Liberal spending, as a record deficit of over $300 billion came out of Ottawa last year. In COVID news, we have 80% of pandemic fighting funding came from the federal government, but despite receiving that money, you mentioned earlier, 6 out of 10 provinces did not increase ICU hospital beds during this time. Another one on healthcare, a new survey showed most Saskatchewan nurses are constantly working, short-staffed, and 60% are considering quitting. They blame exhaustion and provincial leadership for the negative outlook. And then we have UK Health Security Agency is studying and warning that a new COVID variant called XE will be the most transmissible variant yet. But other public health experts say that these types of variants pop up and they disappear on their own and no panic is necessary. We've seen that before all over the world, so I don't know if it's anything to speculate about.
Well, we know the legacy media loves to hit that panic button as soon as they can. So, I mean, they just thrive on those stories, and there's always going to be an expert talking about this will surely be the variant that's going to take us down. I don't think I'll lose sleep over it yet.
And still in Ontario and Quebec, some experts are saying, oh, the 6th wave is coming, blah, 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 right? But it's still the same. That was news from last week. So we'll see how that plays out, if that XE will be coming to Canada anytime soon.
Well, at least that one's easy to spell. So, I mean, all those Greek terms and everything, we're getting pretty confusing for a lot of us. So, I'll be able to type and rant on the XE a lot more quickly. So it's good to see that developing.
I'm glad you can benefit from it, Cory.
Hey, I always try to look on the silver lining of things. You know that.
And then finally, I'll say that in some fun news, Blockbuster is creating a pop-up tour across Canada. Their first stop is going to be in Calgary, and they'll be moving from coast to coast with their pop-up. You can get lots of different merch from them, including fanny packs and onesies. I think I'd like to see you, Cory, in a Blockbuster onesie, full suit, hood too. Maybe I can bring some into the office for us.
Oh, I mean, I'm no fashion maven, so I wouldn't be opposed to anything like that. As we know, I'm not exactly a snappy dresser anyways, but it's kind of bizarre. Like, I see they're selling the merch. They're trying to make it ironically trendy almost, I guess. I mean, if they brought a bunch of VHS tapes and everything, that's fantastic, but I think a lot of us don't even have the ability to play them any longer.
Yeah, they didn't even mention anything about DVDs or VHS tapes, so I think it's just merch, and I think they have their own board game I saw on their website, so that'll be fun for some moviegoers.
Well, something different. I mean, a lot of people look fondly back on the old Blockbuster days, so great. Well, we appreciate that check-in. Lots of stuff always breaking, and we'll talk to you after the show then.
Yeah, thanks so much, Cory.
All right, thanks, Eva. So yes, always lots on the go as we do with the news check-in every day. Things are just, the stories are coming up. And I got to thank everybody who has subscribed. This is how we pay the bills, guys. This is how we stay independent. This is how we give you good, clear reporting on the stories. So I've got to remind everybody, go to westernstandardonline.com and take out a subscription if you haven't already. And hey, if you use the coupon code TRIGGERED, you'll save another $10 on that. For less than $10 a month, I mean, if you take out a whole year, it comes well under $10 a month. You get full access to all of our columns, our news copy, all of that stuff beyond the paywall. It supports us. It helps us keep providing this sort of unique, ongoing content. Reporters across the country, we're hiring, we're expanding. So, hey, get out there, take out a subscription. Thank you to all you have already done so. That's why we're here today, why we're in a much bigger studio. And again, if you haven't already, get out there and get one with us. Along with subscribers, we rely on advertisers, and I should speak to Bitcoin well. These guys have been a really good sponsor for us. Their name sort of says it all. Our sponsors are good that way. They make it easy for me. These are a Western Canadian company. You can see with that picture, they've got ATMs and locations all across Canada. If you're looking to get into digital currencies, these are the guys to help usher you into that. I mean, it's a whole new thing. It's a nebulous world. People aren't too sure about things. This is what they're about. They will lead you into that world if you want to. and see if it's for you. See how you can set up investing, how you can set up your wallet, whether you want automatic deposits into a Bitcoin account or whether you want to pay outward for utility bill payments, things like that. I mean, they make it practical and they make it understandable for you, and it's safe. It's non-custodial. They never have your money. It's always in your control. It's always in your wallet. Check them out, bitcoinwell.com. I'll talk to them about them a little later, but they've been a fantastic sponsor. As you guys keep subscribing, we can keep getting sponsors and we can keep making these shows. So thank you all, and check out bitcoinwell.com. So yeah, a lot of healthcare news, as Eva was saying. So, I mean, what's with our system? How is it? And I don't understand. I honestly don't. How is it when we've had hospitals across the country where for years they've been cutting the amount of staff because they've been deferring a whole pile of procedures? There's tens of thousands of people. I know it's backed up now, so maybe that's where the burnout's coming. But they had months where there were empty floors on hospitals. I mean, the ICUs were full in other areas because they were trying to deal with COVID. I mean, that's one of the systematic problems we've got, right? Why have we got them all in these centralized centers then? How could we, re-examine how we're doing things so we can manage these? And why are nurses getting burned out like this then? I mean, we're spending this much money. We're doing all of these things and the nurses are still getting frazzled and leaving. We're still having staff shortcomings. Well, then we've got to re-examine how we're doing it. One of the discussions that's gone on a lot. I mean, again, centralization. And that's the thing with the left. That's the thing with socialism. These big, bulky hospitals that have all these wings we don't need to do everything there. We should be outsourcing. We should be having outside clinics. Maybe get a hip replacement done in a private clinic down the road. Still universally covered, guys. Just perhaps having a private facility take care of it. Or even a public one outside of that. The problem is that getting the public ones are difficult in such a centralized system. Get a bunch of these services done, dialysis, things like that, in clinics and facilities outside of a main hospital. So when the hospital does have to kind of go into lockdown for something infectious, we aren't backing up all those procedures. We could still do those surgeries. We could still do the dialysis. We could still do cancer treatment, things like that people really need, diagnostics. It's not all in those big main centralized buildings like that are bloated with administration. That's part of the other problem. Something that's been pointed out quite often. Go to a hospital on a weekend, or in the evening. People don't stop being sick at night or on the weekends. But you look in the staff parking lot and it's down to a fraction of what it used to be. Why? Because all the administrators are gone, the paper pushers, the bureaucrats. They take up a massive amount. And again, I mean, yeah, there's private companies that have bad bureaucracies as well and are inefficient, but it's far worse in the public sector, and we know it. And so again, if we could add some more elements, some more providers, broaden who is going to be able to provide these sorts of services, chances are we're going to see some better innovations and be able to provide these things, get a better bang for your buck, and that's what we all want. We want to spend a reasonable amount and get a decent health outcome. And if we continue on the road we are right now, though we haven't been getting it, we got to quit pretending that the course we're on is sustainable. We increased spending, it didn't help. That means we got to look at how we're doing it then. Okay, I'm going to get on to our next guest right away here. And that's Andrew Ruland of Integrated Wealth Management. We're going to have a good discussion in studio on a bunch of financial issues and world issues and just wherever we're going to go with it. So watch this video here. It kind of helps frame things up into a financial sort of mood because we're in budget week. And I'll be right back to join you with Andrew and we'll have a good talk.
The Canadian Taxpayers Federation's Debt Clock Tour is in the national capital, where politicians are really good at wasting your money. And I'm here with someone who wants to be the next Prime Minister, Mr. Poilievre. If you are Prime Minister next, what will you do to stop the clock?
Well, one, the Liberals have a $100 billion slush fund that they've stacked on top of the previous normal spending of government. I'm going to cancel that $100 billion. Two, I'm getting rid of the infrastructure bank. It's a multi-billion-dollar waste of money designed to protect the profits of construction companies that are incompetent and that have cost overruns. That bank is gone. And I'm going to defund the CBC to save $1 billion. And of course, I'm going to bring in a pay-as-you-go law, which means that for every new dollar of unbudgeted spending, the government has to find a dollar of savings. So that is, those are some examples of how we're going to stop the debt from rising. This insane increase that you showed, $1.2 trillion debt, That's more than double than what it was when Trudeau took office, meaning he's added more debt than all the other prime ministers in Canadian history, going back to Confederation, combined. And each child is born with $31,000 in new debt when they come into this world. So we need to stop the rise of the debt, work our way to a balanced budget, and make affordable government so that we can have an affordable life.
Well, that's what Mr. Poilievre says he will do to stop the clock. We need more politicians who are fighting to stop the clock, and we need more politicians to stop wasting your money.
Make more, cost less, with paychecks, not debt.
All right, guys, as we saw, it's budget week. That's coming out at the end of the week. You've seen some of the activists and politicians calling for less spending. I doubt we're going to get that, but that's where we're going. And it frames the discussion for finances, the economy, and things such as that. And having Andrew Ruland in from Integrated Wealth Management is an ideal person to talk about these things. So thanks for joining us in the studio today, Andrew.
My pleasure, Cory.
So, I mean, to start with, I mean, we're in such a tumultuous world. Everything's turned on end. I mean, I was talking earlier about healthcare. Those are challenges from COVID-19, but we've got government spending. We've got currencies going up and down. I guess the key point with investment is stability, and we're not seeing a lot of that right now.
Right. Well, ultimately, we're in probably, for our lifetimes, one of the most chaotic periods of investing. There's always been volatility, but it's always seems to be the worst when we're close to retirement or in retirement. And right now, of course, we've got a lot of geopolitical events that are driving the agenda. And that's, of course, in addition to the economic factors that are behind the geopolitical events and things like that.
Yeah, well, and I mean, it's almost, well, it's impossible to predict. I think, you know, I mean, we saw warnings and so on, but the situation that unfolded in Russia and Ukraine with what's going on over there. But now that it is happening, trying to forecast and look ahead and how that's going to impact things is kind of where we're sitting. And so a lot of people might not realize it's going to have a very strong impact on the agricultural sector in general, or at least agricultural commodities.
I would think that is actually going to be the single biggest effect of this war in Ukraine, and especially if it leaks a little bit further out from Ukraine, which NATO seems to be poking the bear, so to speak, to try and get to happen. But the secondary and the tertiary effects from the supply disruptions that come out of Ukraine and Russia are really, really significant. And I think, yes, we're going to see the worst of them in the food supply area.
Yeah, and I mean, that gets into things that are critical needs, foodstuffs. When inflation starts hitting there, and that's what will happen, then how do we start preparing for that? What do we do ourselves on this part of the world to at least try to shield ourselves from some of those impacts?
Well, on a personal level, we have to think about what does our own food security look like. So there's a big trend towards homesteading for a lot of people, or like I do, grow a lot of vegetables in the backyard. I've done that for years just because I like gardening. But on the financial level, really what we need to focus on is investing in things that are actually going to go up because of the chaos. Now, some people don't like the thought of that because they feel bad that they're profiting off of the...
Feels like you're taking advantage of a bad situation.
Correct.
Yeah.
But I mean, unless you're actually someone who's actually helping to create the situation, you're just responding to what other bad actors are doing. So really, it's just about following trends that are going to work to your advantage. And right now, we're in the beginning of what I think is more or less a stagflation environment, where the economy is not really expanding, but we have so many supply chain disruptions that prices are going up. So the economy is stagnant, but prices are inflating. And that's a very dangerous place to be. Last time we were there was in the 70s.
So with would it help with some of the economic development, though? I mean, we are kind of well placed as a parallel to Russia and Ukraine. I mean, central Canada is a big agricultural producer, potash as well, which is another commodity.
Yes.
Very big, and it is a Saskatchewan commodity. So we could get some economic growth, at least within Canada, with our resources to counter some of the stagflation, perhaps.
Yes. However, we have some factors that play into it, like there's wage inflation, which is pushing up prices at the grocery store. So if you work in an industry that doesn't benefit from inflation, you're going to be in trouble because your income's not going to go up. But if you live or if you work in an industry that does benefit from inflation, you're going to be positively affected by it. It's not just things like potash and wheat, which are essential, but it's also in things like uranium. That's a big one going forward.
Yeah, well, people are starting to move towards zero emission targets and goals and things such as that, and expanding their nuclear generating capacities. And again, Canada's well placed to supply, hopefully, on those sorts of things if with northern Saskatchewan and areas and deposits.
Absolutely. The Athabasca Basin is one of the best areas in the world for actually for mining of uranium, and Cameco in particular is, well, they're a world-class operator. So
yeah, so suddenly looking at another area of hedges and so on, the interest rates are low, but then the bond markets are starting to get forgotten, as some people are saying that. How does that tie into things right now? I mean, it's a complex area of monetary policy, but when we got a government trying to deal with inflation, then often the banks were talking about issuing bonds to try and that's where I'm at, hoping for your expertise to expand on it.
Well, actually, the biggest worries that we have, the biggest risks that we have in the financial markets going forward are actually not in the stock markets, because stock markets are really about equity, right? And so they're companies, and they adapt very quickly to the environment that that they're operating in. The biggest problem we actually have is that we've gone through basically a 34 or 35-year decline in interest rates, supported by central banks monetizing debt, or what we call quantitative easing. But we're actually past the bottom of the interest rate market. I'll remember this well because the bond market actually peaked on my 53rd birthday, which was August 4th of 2020. And so when interest rates start to rise, that's when we get big problems in bond markets, because the price of bonds is inverse to the rate of interest that's in prevailing in the markets. And interest rates can go up for a couple of reasons. One is inflation, cost push inflation from a growing economy. But the other reason, which is actually much more worrying, is when we have a declining confidence in government as a borrower. And that is what we are on the precipice of seeing. So people don't think that bonds can really go down in value, and that's always the safest part of their portfolio. But what we've seen recently is that bonds can go down pretty quickly in value. In fact, the first quarter of 2022 was the worst quarter ever in the bond markets. Most people don't realize that, right? And if that's supposed to be the safe part of your portfolio, you need to come in with alternatives to traditional bonds, which is a big part of what we do.
Yeah, so what kind of alternatives are we talking about? I mean, safety and money is always just, I mean, you work so hard for it, you save it. It's a horror story as we're starting to get a little grayer in the muzzle. You start thinking of retirement. You want to make sure that nest egg is going to be there when the time comes. Nobody wants to go back to work at 75.
Exactly. So when it comes to investing in things that are safer, there's dividend paying stocks, and dividends typically go up faster than inflation. So that's a good thing. But on the part that isn't in stocks in your portfolio, you have to have things that are alternatives to government bonds. So we look at corporate bonds, which tend to be shorter term in nature, and there's actual physical security for corporate bonds, unlike government bonds. Because when you buy a U.S. Treasury, you don't get the left arm of the Statue of Liberty. It's just based on the full faith and credit of the borrower. But with corporate bonds, there is actually physical security behind it. The other part of it is to actually look at what we call private alternatives, which would be private lending in the secondary market, or what we call our business-to-business lending primarily, and also in real estate, because real estate is also an inflation hedge.
Okay, and then real estate, yeah, well, that's something that's really been, I would say almost disrupted as well. I mean, we got some markets like Vancouver and Toronto are super heated, and in Calgary, for a while, it was kind of flat. I think it's kind of rising a bit now, but it's unpredictable as many these days. I mean. It
is, and longer term, real estate, even including principal residence housing, is an inflation hedge. But we also have to recognize that over time, the value of real estate has been driven by declining interest rates. And so as interest rates continue to rise, people will not be able to afford to pay as much for a home because their income hasn't gone up. And the price of real estate is usually based on how much payment people can afford who are still working. So that's going to be a little bit of a counterbalance, right? It's going to be a little bit of a headwind on the real estate market.
Yeah, well, and people with a fixed income, I mean, there's people with a very tight budget, and interest rates, I mean, even a small rise could really put them under a lot of financial strain if they don't have a fixed mortgage or if they're carrying a lot of personal debt.
Absolutely. About 25% of outstanding mortgages in Canada are variable rate, which we think is quite a trap. If people are in a situation where they have, 5, 10, 15 years left on their mortgage and they're on a variable rate, we'd strongly suggest that they look at locking in for the longer term. because interest rates can go up a whole lot faster than people think. Okay. There's something called availability bias. It's one of the cognitive biases in investing. And if we haven't experienced something before, it's not available in our memory. And so the vast majority of people today who are borrowing money for housing or for anything else, they've never had the experience of 10, 12, 14% mortgage rates. So they don't think it can happen. So it's one of those things. I don't think it can happen because this never happened to me before. And that's just ancient history.
Yeah, and it wasn't that long ago, but for a lot of younger homeowners, it certainly, when they wouldn't remember the 80s and the 90s with some crazy double-digit interest rates, and things are secular, it tends to come back to those.
It does, and actually those people of that age would do well to actually talk to their parents about how they dealt with the incredibly high mortgage rates, because their parents would have been in that situation. Well,
in Alberta, I mean, just to tie in a little politics, but there was the National Energy Program. That was coupled with those double-digit interest rates, massive inflation going on, and people literally had to walk away from their homes because they couldn't make the payments. There was nobody wanted to buy the place. The mortgage was too high. I mean, we aren't there yet, but we always got to remember, if it could happen before, it can happen again.
Yeah. Hopefully it's going to be a while before we get there. But the reality is that the longer that governments go on with spending out of control, making drunken sailors look like they could pass a sobriety test. The fact is that governments are spending public finances into a high interest rate trap, because the more that they spend, the less they have from their government revenues to actually go towards interest payments, and then you get trapped into increasing taxes, and yet you have interest payments on your new debt that go up and up and up. So you get into a very, very dangerous corner.
Yes, and then it doesn't look like we're going to be seeing stability anytime soon. Something that was also
stability. What's that?
Well, I mean, I think there were periods in the past, at least for years at a time, but right now the world's just in a crazy place. Something I guess that's been interesting is the world hasn't been eager to jump in and get in on a ground war with Ukraine and Russia, which is good. I mean, we didn't have to live through that, but our parents and grandparents, dealt with World War II and massive things that are awful. But we've gone into economic warfare, sanctions, and that's perhaps less immediately dangerous to people and harming people, but it's really, again, causing our world economy a whole lot of fluctuation.
I think that sanctions are actually the equivalent of economic warfare. So it's not a kinetic war, but the reality is that if you look at different places around the world that have incredible dependence on the supply chains coming out of Ukraine and Russia, so this would be, areas like Turkey and Egypt, in particular for wheat and different things like that. But the entire world is really dependent on the use of fertilizers in agriculture production. And you've got, non-hydrous ammonia, and you've got, potassium, you've got all kinds of nitrogen, different things like that are incredibly important inputs to create fertilizer. And without fertilizer, the world's food supply gets unstable and unreliable. And if you consider what happens thereafter, what happens when people get hungry?
Get more war.
We get more war, right? We get angry, right? If a person misses a meal, they might get hangry. But what happens when your food supply is genuinely compromised? And when people think that they have nothing to lose, they lose it.
Well, and again, getting back to people who don't remember, but that was a huge thing in the 80s and 90s. Northern Africa, I mean, they were suffering under a horrific famine. Ethiopia, Somalia, I mean, it was terrible. And that instability through the famine, carried over for decades afterwards. And when we're starting to, impose sanctions or cut off the world's breadbaskets, that's going to have longer-term repercussions.
Yeah, and I mean, there are going to be some winners out of this. Wheat growers in particular, if you can get your hands on it, and if you can manage to carry the cost of higher fertilizer prices. Saskatchewan and Alberta wheat farmers, and to a certain extent in Manitoba as well, are going to do well, and northern BC, of course. They're going to do well because they're going to be able to fetch good prices for it. But the difficulty outside of North America is going to actually be accessing supply. That's the problem, and that's when we get more political unrest.
And then what about energy? I mean, that's something that impacts everything. And we are a conventional energy producer and exporter, though I think we're kind of maxed out right now, but that's what leads to the higher prices. But
maybe we should try and build a pipeline.
That would be novel concept would, or even
Come on, man.
yeah, speeding up at least the ones we've got. You know, it's just been agonizingly slow, but we're not seeing many indications on our federal front that they're eager to facilitate this any further than they have, unfortunately, yet.
No, you're right. And I mean, you mentioned right at the beginning of the interview that, you know, Canada's well positioned with agriculture and energy. Well, that's true, but we actually have to be in a position where there is a regulatory environment that actually encourages the harvesting, not just of agriculture, but of energy.
Yeah, and delivering. I mean, it's the
Yes.
whole thing all the way along the line. And
Yeah.
some people might want to, you know, realize when supply chains. I mean, nobody ever talked about those more than 5 years ago, and now it's so acute. But we have to remember too, we've been making up for the lack of pipelines through shipping oil through rail, but that's putting pressure on our agricultural producers because they bring in their fertilizers by rail and they export their produce through rail as well, and it's just punishing ourselves all over the map.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like shooting ourselves in the foot and saying, "See, take that, Vladimir Putin."
Yeah. No, and then I guess just morally, you know, if people could keep that in mind when it comes to calling for economic sanctions, is it's not going to hurt Putin, but it's certainly going to hurt a lot of people on the ground, the common people who really wanted no part of this whole mess in the first place. So,
Well, it's not the people that ever make war; it's only governments.
yes, and they're unfortunately very good at doing so.
Lots of practice.
Yeah. So, I mean, again, I guess just kind of bringing things back to home, you know, how can that's your job and role is helping us navigate those waters, or to try to at least make sure we can weather the latest storm as efficiently and safely as possible. What tools do you guys offer for that sort of thing?
Well, we have a great website with a great video library that we've built up over the last 4 or 5 years. And this Saturday, we're actually doing a live webinar at noon. So Saturday, April 9th at noon. And it's called Grace Under Pressure. And it's actually about how to invest and how our managers invest during, you know, the chaotic environment that we're in. And if you can attend live, that's great. But if you can't, but would like to get a recording, you can register for that. So you can do that by by going to our website, which is i-wealth at i-wealth.ca. And you can register for free there and attend that, and gives you a sense of who we are and how we do things.
Great. With the live webinar, I mean, live versus recorded, is there opportunities for questions to be posed then in that case and answered? Or
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, generally speaking, the content itself goes somewhere between 50 and 55 minutes, and then we do about 15 minutes of Q&A.
Great. Yeah, just kind of wrap around to that homesteading thing. I'm taking up beekeeping this year, just as a side digression, and I'm doing YouTube University mostly to learn from it. Hey, videos are fantastic online and everything, and a lot of resources, but sometimes wait, I have another question on this, and I don't necessarily have a live person on the other end to ask. I still can root around and find it, and then the recorded product is great. But it'd be nice to catch these instructional beekeepers live, so I can avoid some stings down the road rather than learning the hard way.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, well, I appreciate you coming in. I hope folks get out to that webinar. As I said, I mean, I'm the political weenie. I know all the names and the players and so on, but in finances, I'm a little weak, and that's why I rely on other people to show me and teach me about it. I didn't understand quite how the bonds are working and how that's impacted. Yeah. There's just so much more, but it's important to all of us. So, I mean, if I can't navigate it myself, I want somebody who knows how to do it to help me with it.
Well, that's the beauty of a developed economy, right? We have specialists.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
awesome.
It's been great talking to you. Thank you very much for coming in today. And I'm sure we'll be talking again soon.
Sounds good. Thanks, Cory.
Great. Thanks, Andrew. All right. So, yes, that was Andrew Ruland with Integrated Wealth Management. And, well, I'll get on to talking about one of our sponsors now as Andrew makes his way from the studio there. And that is the Canadian Shooting Sports Association. These guys have been a great sponsor for us for quite some time now. If you enjoy firearms, if you're looking to get into firearms, if you hunt, you target shoot, any of those things, their name says what they are. They are an association for firearm owners to share resources, learn from each other. As I said, as we were talking with Andrew with videos and things that go online, they offer all sorts of things for the safe utilization of firearms, resources like that. And networking, you know, that's part of it. Get together with other people with the same interests and discuss those things. On top of all of that, they are lobbying on your behalf. As we've said many a time, the government is eager and trying to take away your resources. They want to do so. And you have to stand up for yourself or they will. Your firearms are your right. What the Liberals have been doing, firearm owners already know it, is they keep recategorizing perfectly legal hunting firearms and calling them assault style firearms, things like that, and then taking them away from you. We got to push back or they're going to keep doing it. So check these guys out. This is how you can protect your assets at the Canadian Shooting Sports Association, CSSA-CILA.org. Take out a membership for them and protect your property. So yeah, just reviewing with Andrew Ruland, like I said, finances, it's I have to admit some of the areas where I'm a little weaker on my education than others. I know some people will tell me I'm weak on a whole bunch of them. They're probably right on some of them. But I find that world to be a little bit confusing for me at times. And, as we start getting a little older, we start getting a little more concerned. We actually start thinking about retirement for the first time. I mean, I'm only 51. I like to think I'm going to be working for a while yet. But I like to think at some point I'm going to be able to kick back and take it easy. And it's kind of scary when we see our currencies devaluing, when we see stocks. I mean, everybody's got advice on it. Not everybody's got good advice on it. So people like integrated wealth management and those webinars, seminars like that really help us make educated choices with our finances so that, we can do the right thing with it. So check that webinar out if you get time there. Integrated wealth management. These guys can show you, I guess, look at the disciplined portfolio solutions. There's one of the things I have seen and I've heard from some other people and I've had friends. Trading has changed a lot over the years and it's so quick and it's so easy, but we get a lot of people diving in. I had a friend who went in online trading, and a lot of trading is I'm not going to give a lot of financial advice because I'm not great with it, but one of the things I do know is you try to look for the long game. And the problem he was doing, of course, he keeps jumping in and out with stocks thinking he can predict what's going to rise and what isn't, and in the end he lost a whole pile of money because you're still paying for those trading fees and things like that, and you don't always necessarily pick the right horse. And that's almost how it gets. So if you're going to play the markets that way, it's like horse racing. You're kind of taking your gambles. So I mean, hey, if people want to mess around with their money that way, by all means, but I mean, make sure you're safely keeping some of it stored away somewhere for your benefit. And that's part of what I'm doing with Bitcoin, by the way. I'll go into them on that thing as well, but I'm hedging a little over that way. Somebody was mentioning, let's look at a few of the comments here, getting Brett Wilson on. Yeah, I had Brett on once before. That was over the rally, actually, because Brett was offering a reward, as were we and True North News, looking for whoever the idiots were who were walking around with a swastika flag. We were offering thousands for that. And lo and behold, we never did identify who those people were and have some solid names. So nobody collected the reward. It was unfortunate. But yeah, I might get Mr. Wilson on again in the future to talk about some things. He's, mixed a lot of people, it's like anybody. Some people really like him. Some people really don't. As I tweeted out, I noticed Nico was showing my Twitter account at Cory B. Morgan. I tweeted out a voicemail I'd gotten from a less than fan the other day. Boy, he threw an expletive laden bunch of insanity on the voicemail at me for a while. I just get a chuckle out when I listen to those things, but all the same, not everybody has to agree. That's all I'm saying. So you don't necessarily have to agree with Brett Wilson. I noticed a lot of the debate that people got upset with, well, both Brett and myself actually, was over his support of vaccination and things like that, while he's a solid conservative with individual rights outside of that. And likewise, I'm the same. I don't have a problem with vaccination. My main thing is just that it has to be a choice. That's all. And yeah, we've got some heavy coercion that's been happening, taking people's jobs away, taking away their ability to travel, things like that. That's coercion. That's not acceptable. Vaccine mandates don't work. They don't. We're seeing those things now as we're learning. But it doesn't mean I have a problem with it itself. So let's see here what else we got. Dr. Hinshaw, and just to give a plug to one of our friendly competitors with Rebel News, Sheila Gunn Reid has been covering that. Dr. Hinshaw has been in front of the courts. This is day 2 of it now, giving testimony with the Alberta government. They're under challenges from the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms and a number of other lawsuits. And she's been answering questions and getting cross-examined by Leighton Gray. And it's been interesting to watch some of that as it's been coming out. I mean, she's having a hard time answering some of those questions. And people have been waiting a long time for Dr. Hinshaw to be put before that. I end up mixed with her. I mean, she's in whatever. You took the job, you take the flack, and you got to take some responsibility. That's the way it goes. But she's also got a thankless, no-win sort of job going on that sort of spot. Whenever she would move one way, everybody on one side craps on her for opening up too fast, and then others say, "Oh, you're imposing on our freedoms by taking too long," which I agree with. But she's never gotten a good ride, and now she's getting a post. Well, I wouldn't say post, but getting the pandemic's winding down, some time in front of the courts to try and explain herself, and I doubt she's having a good time with it. But at least we're going to get some direct testimony and under cross-examination. BC Prairie Girl saying, Hinshaw isn't worried the judiciary will cover for her. Again, if you look at Sheila Gunn Reid's Twitter account, I shouldn't be driving too many people away from Standard, but hey, we live tweet all sorts of good stuff too. She's been tweeting out things from the court as she watches it. And at one point, there was the Alberta Health Services lawyer objecting to a question. And I believe it was a question from the JCCF asking for evidence and follow-up. And, what science and studies did Dr. Hinshaw use for some of her moves? They didn't want to answer that. They objected, and the judge said, no, it's overruled. We want to hear it. So hang on. The judge had an opportunity to block things there, and the judge didn't do so in that case. Others are saying Bonnie Henry should go before the courts, and others. So, we're seeing finally getting hindsight. We're finally able to look back. That's what I was going on about healthcare and those options and things like that earlier too. We've got 2 years of this behind us now. We should be looking at things and learning from them. Seeing some committee things, we see that the Emergencies Act was completely unjustified. We see that the government overreached. We're learning that in hindsight. Of course, the only thing we have to do is make sure that we're not going to be doing it again. That's easier said than done. So let's see. This is a federal agency declined comment on a project manager. Oh yeah, he boasted of joining counter protests against the Freedom Convoy, because we had these counter protesters going out there, a small amount of them. We had that going on in Calgary too. They were causing more problems than anybody with the convoy. And he called the truckers anti-Trudeau roughnecks. And federal guides say that employees, at least senior ones, must be politically neutral. A lot of the people at the convoy certainly weren't Trudeau supporters, but most of what they were out for was, again, against the mandates, against the vaccine mandates, no matter who was going to bring them in, whether it was Trudeau or anybody else. But it shows that partisan nature of this. And roughnecks, well, I'm guessing maybe he meant rednecks. I don't know. It doesn't matter. He was trying to mean it as a slur, that's for sure. A roughneck is typically an oil field term, and it's not that much of a derogatory one, at least not out here in Alberta. But this guy saying, I was opposed to the goals of the convoy from the beginning, said Nikolai Christoph, a biologist with the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. So I grew increasingly furious with the protesters, and I went to the front lines of every counter protest. And he identified himself as a federal employee, as he wrote his newspaper commentary, critical of the convoy. This is a senior government person. Are we going to get unbiased government? Are we going to get proper government? Or as Renee is saying, they're so tired of the name calling, the spitting out of these things, this constant abusing of each other as citizens. There's some of the indicators of what we were seeing earlier with a weird poll that was done. I say weird just because, we already knew. All they were doing is confirming, I guess, the numbers, but saying, Canadians have found themselves more divided over some of the things due to the pandemic and the vaccine mandates and such. Well, of course we have. What do you expect? We've got a prime minister who labeled people who are vaccine hesitant as being, white supremacists and Nazis and crap like that. And of course, when it trickles down to people like these senior public employees who feel they have the right to do the same thing, the right to label fellow Canadians the same way. You don't have to agree, but we've got to start learning to respect each other a little bit. Honestly, it shouldn't be that hard. A degree of respect. Speaking of respect, and I know we had as I had the Mike Baker on yesterday. He's a VP or a former VP of the Police Officers Association in Calgary and Alberta-wide as well. And they're having a big problem. It's still going with the thin blue line patches. And I know some people have been upset with some police behavior. Fine, we can disagree on things. We can agree on things. I don't think anybody's going to pretend that the police have been saints in every circumstance. But at the same time, they have a rotten job and a tough one. And when they're constantly getting crapped on, no matter what they do, what side they take, or what they, act, morale is going into the toilet. So RCMP, this news is applications plummet. So it says the image of policing is so poor that applications to the RCMP have plummeted. The Commons Human Resources Committee was told yesterday. Almost a third of those who do apply are accepted and are accepted, never even bothered to finish training. So 30% of those, once they apply and realize, yeah, you're in, and I don't know how long that takes, but they just say, screw this, I don't like where it's going, and they don't finish the training. And this is from the National Police Federation. They're saying policing is no longer considered as an attractive career as it used to be, testified Brian Sauvé, president of the Federation. Police services across North America are seeing a decline in applicants. But is that surprising? You know, again, throughout the BLM protests and such, I mean, they were getting spit on, they were getting yelled at, they were getting berated. You can't, speaking of disrespect, speaking of smearing a large amount of people over the actions of a few, most of the officers at those protests had absolutely nothing to do with any of the things that were being protested. They'd done nothing wrong, but they get that abuse, and the government officials abandoned them. They backed away, they ran away, they were scared of the protesters. Of course, you feel demoralized. Some of the language here in Calgary, and I think people are seeing it in their civic politicians in general, is outrageous. I mean, Giancarlo Carra, who's just a loony left councillor in Calgary, and every city's got them, we know that. But he is just been outright vitriolic towards the police and threatening. You know, he's saying, "I'm gonna, you know, there's gonna be repercussions if you dare wear those patches. You dare show pride." Like, let's strip that thin veneer on what these politicians are saying. They keep saying this patch was identified as something horrific and racist and colonial and blah blah blah. Come on. The polls did show that only 5% of people even in general knew what the patch meant, and once it was explained to them, well over 75% of people were perfectly fine with it. But it became a symbol, and the reality is these politicians, particularly the ones have an anti-policing mentality in general, and it's not doing us any favors. It's stressing police officers, it's putting them under pressure, and again, as I said before, that leads to them potentially acting out more. And now people don't even apply. I mean, think about that. For those of us who are a little older, we remember, you know, Sesame Street and things like that. I mean, the police officer was supposed to be the member of your neighborhood, the one as a kid you were told you go to if there's ever anything to be afraid of. You go to the police officer, they'll help you out. It was an honored career. It was something that, you know, a person should aspire to get into. And again, not every police officer is a good actor. I understand that, but most of them did. And now 30% who are applying even or dropping out. People don't want to become that. I remember the old RCMP. There was that vision of Canadians, that red uniform, riding the horses, going along. That was something that, you know, a lot of kids wanted to be. It's not happening anymore. Now, as we have fewer and fewer applicants for these roles, the quality of those who get through isn't going to get better. That's a straight out supply and demand sort of thing. I mean, not saying every person who's going to go through and follow up and become a police officer is going to be of lesser quality, but the fewer applying for the job, the fewer better applicants you're going to be able to choose from. I mean, then you're going to start getting police forces saying, we'll take anybody and everybody. And again, not everybody is appropriate to be a police officer. And when you get the inappropriate people into that role, well, that's when we get the ones that are doing things wrong. So we're on a bad trend, and we've got to figure out how to deal with that. I mean, you know, somebody's saying who would want to work for a corrupt government as a police officer? Well, I don't know. I mean, who'd want to work as a police officer at all is what I'm saying these days. People can differ on whether or not the government's corrupt at any given time or which government. I mean, I do feel our government is wrong and corrupt in many ways. But it doesn't take away the need that we have to have police officers in a civilized society. We're not going to be safe without them, guys. We have to have them. You know, when that store is being robbed, we need somebody to respond to it. When a person's being assaulted in the street, we need a police officer. When there's a domestic abuse incident with somebody beating the crap out of their spouse, we need that intervener. Some of the stuff they have to see, the murders, the child abuse cases these guys have to deal with, and women in the force. And I mean, it's asking a whole lot of people. And then to have their bosses, their leaders, their representatives constantly on their case for it is not good. So let's go further on the news. It seems my guest is late. They love doing that on this live show. Eva was saying, stop the spending. This is something, yeah, MPs have told cabinet that they have to stop deficit spending. Well, that's a given, right? And they recommended the cabinet present as soon as possible a plan to return to a balanced budget as the first of 222 recommendations on finances. The government's not going to do that. I mean, but I think what was it? I'm going to have Franco on at the end of the week because we do have a federal budget coming out on Thursday, and I think the last estimates were putting it at a balanced budget maybe by 2090 or something. I mean, we got a prime minister who is going to have died, even though he's the same age as me, of old age by the time they even consider a balanced budget. He doesn't care, and his followers don't care, and most of them don't care. That was part of what I was talking with Andrew about, getting some economic reality out here, some dollars and cents reality. Speaking of deficits, I think your common citizens have a lot of those deficits. We can't keep borrowing like this. Deficit last year, I mean, this is where some people get confusion too, deficit and debt. Deficit's what they're short of year by year. Debt's that cumulative amount. So the deficit last year was $327 billion. That's their estimate. 1 year. The previous record was $55 billion. Like, look at that, the massive increase in that. It's insane. So it goes without saying that they got to cut their spending, but then they're not gonna. We are in some terrible, terrible waters. Let's get a little more local again. We got some news from the UCP and their ongoing internal battles and fights. The Sugarwood Park Constituency Board members, I guess they sent a letter, never even got a reply, asking for the results of a February 8th annual general meeting, or asking for those results to be suspended. So the former CA director, Jordan Hodges, sent a reminder to the UCP president, Cynthia Moore, and just saying, we sent the message 2 months ago and have had no response. That party is in dire trouble. It's I don't know what's going to fix it for these guys, if it can be fixed. So the date, we're 4 days away from when the Red Deer fiasco was supposed to come along. That's not going to happen now. It's going to be a mail-in ballot thing. And we're seeing a lot of very questionable things about some memberships that came in shortly before the deadline. I know there's been some investigation on that. We're looking farther into those things as well with that, with the AGM. I think we're in for a few more weeks of crazy news with that. Some people saying get rid of Kenny. Yeah, I think that's what a lot of people want to do. I don't know what you can do, right? The internal party mechanisms get controlled by the top, and it looks like the party executive is beholden to the leader. So there's no means of reviewing. Again, what I'm saying is I'm going to throw a prediction out there. I throw them out all the time. They're often wrong. Sometimes I'm right. Some people say broken clock's right twice a day. I think Kenny might win this by a narrow margin, like 55% or something, which is going to be terrible. He's going to say it's a mandate, and part of his justification is going to say, look, we just don't have time to go into a leadership race now. The election's less than a year away. We just can't do it. You're just going to have to stick with me, and I'll win over that 45% in the next 8-9 months. See, they're purposely every trick in the book to kick the can down the road, not to be accountable to the members. And if they're not accountable to the members, they're not going to be accountable to Albertans. If you can't even show accountability and respect for democracy to those who paid and took part in your party, how are you going to respect the province as a whole? It's very disturbing. As I've said, I'm sad when I report on and make these predictions, though. I really wanted Jason Kennedy to do better. I really thought he was going to do better. I was very supportive of him when he got the UCP together and when he won that leadership. And now I can't. But then I don't know if we're going to do any better with all the alternatives. We got Brian Jean out there. He's been running around, but most of his campaign's based on spite. Would he be any better than Kenny? I don't know. I'm not that confident that he would. Part of why people have said, the reason that they can't support, ousting Kenny at this point is that there's no replacement, or not one that they can accept at this point. And I don't see Jean inspiring the world, but who knows? Things could change. Danielle Smith now has stepped out of the woodwork, so I wouldn't even say that. She's been on our shows and about around here and everything, but she's made it clear if the position opens, she'll run for it. It's a little less aggressive than Brian Jean, so she's not trying to knock Jason Kenney from his role, but she's saying if he doesn't have it anymore, she will run for the leadership, and she's going to run for an MLA seat right now. As I spoke earlier, I was on with the MLA for Airdrie Cochrane there, Guthrie, and he's been very critical of Jason Kenney, very directly so. And there's not going to be a place for him in that party after this race. I asked him about it. He didn't say directly what would happen, but I said, what's going to happen with you if Jason Kenney stays in? Because you've kind of crossed a lot of lines of no return. He says, well, we'll have to, see what we do about it at the time. But the reality, what he's saying is he knows he's basically hooped. So would Leela here probably be, Jason Steffen, some of the others who've been very vocal. So we're going to have a divided caucus. We're going to have more than a divided caucus. We're going to have a divided House. And somebody else pointed out Todd Lowen. I love Todd. He's a fantastic guy. Principal. We got Drew Barnes in there. A few MLAs cross that floor to those guys, and suddenly you have another party with party status, with a research budget, with questions in the House. And boy, we're looking a heck of a lot like we did towards the end of Redford's government, which unfortunately led to a term of Notley's government, which was not an improvement. So we've got a very difficult circumstance to look forward to here. And that's where, again, I think personally, I don't have a membership. Maybe I'll be proven wrong, but it'd be better to get Kenney out and replace him and try and get a fresh start. I don't know who, but I don't think you can fix this in time. This party is too ripped up, too internally divided. If he tries to cling within, I think they're going to tear themselves apart further. We're going to have a legislature with MLAs, with multiple parties sitting in it, multiple conservative parties sitting in it. And that is going to potentially, at least, lead to Rachel Notley waltzing back into the premier's chair, even if only 30% of the province supports her. Gary's saying maybe Jeremy Farkas. That's an interesting one. I don't know. I mean, Jeremy, he's on that charity hike all the way from Mexico. It's something worth watching. If you don't follow Jeremy Farkas, he was a candidate for mayor in Calgary. He was a councillor for some years, very outspoken, very libertarian. He was often rubbing council and the mayor with Nenshi the wrong way. He made a run for mayor, though, didn't win. Jody Gondek won. So now he's doing a charity thing. I think it's for Big Brothers and Sisters, and it's a hike. He's hiking all the way from the Mexican border to Canada. He's been raising great funds and taking some excellent pictures. I don't know if Jeremy's interested in getting back into politics again or not. I'm sure he's kind of part of this fundraising is clearing his head. It was a hard blow losing that the mayoral race. But it's another name. Keep throwing those names out there. Maybe he does after when he's done with this want to go into provincial politics. I don't know. I don't know if he'd be the one to lead necessarily either. It's a big question mark there. Let's see. Shirley saying, I think Kenney will take the UCP down with him as he'll never resign. I don't know. I'm kind of worrying about that just he's going to cling no matter what and no matter how negative it gets. So we're just going to have to keep watching it unfold and keep covering it as we go. Somebody else, Shirley saying Peter Guthrie or Todd Lowen should run for the new leader. Maybe. They're certainly showing principles. They're standing up. They just won't take it anymore. And, for every one of those who are openly speaking about the UCP from within caucus, there's a number of others who are just quietly sitting on the backbench, but they're not content. They're ready to move. They're ready to roll. And they're not going to stay on if Kenney stays on as the leader. So we're going to see what happens there. Another side note of, let's see, crazy politicians. I'll just give a quick personal story as I ramble on for my belated guests here. I see that Edmonton looks like they're going to stop spraying for mosquitoes this year. And this is relevant to everybody in Canada too. It's funny because municipalities do this over and over again. This could happen in your municipality if it hasn't already. I grew up in Banff, back in the 70s and 80s as a kid. And there's always the eco-kooks or anti-spraying for mosquitoes. They want to save everything all the way down to the little mosquito. And they don't understand chemicals. They're scared of chemicals. Water's a chemical, guys. And there are some very benign chemicals that keep mosquitoes under control. Mosquitoes, by the way, are one of the number one killers in the entire world. Malaria, of course, is spread through mosquitoes. Yellow fever, all sorts of nasty diseases are spread by mosquitoes. And we have them in every part of the world. I've traveled all over the world. It seems the only two things that are common no matter where I go. There's always mosquitoes and ravens. I like ravens, but they're a commonality everywhere. Either way, we keep them under control in our urban areas. I think a lot of people don't even necessarily realize it. And until it's gone. So a bunch of tree huggers and hippies in Banff back it would have been in the early 80s one year because they used to spray around the town site. They spray some sloughs and areas and things like that with some mosquito control products and would just keep them down. They'd still be around, but unless you went into the woods, it wasn't bad. So they said, fine, we won't do it this year. And they didn't. Oh, what a summer. It was unbearable. You could not go into your yard. You could not leave your house. Those things would just coat you. They drove you bananas. And you know what? It taught a lesson to those people because they shut the hell up the next year when the spraying resumed again because they realized that whatever problem they might have with spraying wasn't nearly as insufferable as not spraying. Edmonton, unfortunately, it looks like is going to learn that lesson this year. They're going to stop spraying around the city. So guys, you better stock up on the bug dope, as if you get that good cycle of a few rainy days in a row and some sunshine, they're going to eat you alive. And as I said, just careful what you wish for, guys. I'm going to talk about our sponsor one more time. I said earlier I was going to expand a bit on Bitcoin Well. We're talking about investments, hedging bets, and things such as that. Well, Bitcoin Well, these guys help you, as I said, get into the digital currency world, getting away from the bank's control of your money, things such as that. And they have corporate plans. This is something for guys like me, lazy savers, people who want someone to take care of everything for me in that sense. And my poor long-suffering wife, Jane, does so fantastically as a bookkeeper. So things like saving money on the side with Bitcoin Well, they make it as easy as possible. They set me up with a wallet, and we have a corporate plan here at the Western Standard. A portion of my wages every month goes into my Bitcoin wallet, and the Western Standard actually matches that. So I got a little bit of savings in the digital currency off to the side, trouble-free, headache-free. For a guy who's fiscally simplistic like myself, at least with those things with managing personal finances. And that's what these guys do. They are helping you manage these things and make it easy for you. See if you want to put it into your, ask your employer if they can put it into their workplace, or if you're an employer, consider that as another little benefit to offer staff. And of course, it's voluntary at the Standard. We didn't have to go into Bitcoin, but those who choose to can do that. So check out bitcoinwell.com, all sorts of savings plans, ways to get some money outside of regular currencies and get into that digital world. Again, a good Alberta company, one-on-one service. They'll show you the way to go with that. Okay, I think at this point, I am going to wrap it up, guys. Mr. Cooper must have been delayed or something somewhere else. So, well, we'll try and catch him a little later. I got a good show coming up tomorrow. Actually, I'm going to be talking to Colin Craig of secondstreet.org. They've done a lot on healthcare reform. I kind of started those gears turning today when I was talking about health and the need for reform and the firing of that of Dr. Yiu. And Colin Craig will be able to expand further on that, though, with how can we reform it? What can we do? Some numbers, some breakdowns, some things like that, because they've been a very effective organization on that front and things like that. And as well, I'm going to have David Craden. He's our Ottawa columnist out there, and his columns have been coming out. Just if you want somebody who takes great shots at Prime Minister Trudeau, David Craden is your man. He eviscerates them regularly. Shirley asking what happened to Barry Cooper. I'm not sure. We'll follow up with that after the show. Shirley, he was to be on. He didn't show up. Perhaps it was a time zone confusion or something. I don't know. That's one of the challenges of being live. I love being live. It's great. But of course, sometimes it has its other challenges in times like right now. We'll see about getting him again later on. So Les asking whether Bitcoin is safe for retired people. Is it safe to invest in? Well, I won't give people direct financial advice, but what I will say is if you're interested in Bitcoin, like I said, go to bitcoinwell.com. Reminding everybody, if you're following on Facebook, YouTube, Rumble, all those sites we're on, we're streaming to Twitter even. Make sure to like, follow, hit those alerts so they pop up when you see that. We get specials coming up all the time. We do live breaking news, and you don't want to miss any of that, and it helps us keep spreading that word. So again, we're going to have a good show coming in tomorrow, and I'm certain Colin Craig's going to be in, as is David Craden, and more to come throughout the week. So thank you all for tuning in today, guys, and I'll see you tomorrow at 11:30 a.m. sharp.